World Chess Championship game number 8, Ding Liren with the white pieces, Gukesh D with the black pieces. We see in English, and Ding has played a different first move, different opening in all 4 of his white games so far. E5, this is called a reverse Sicilian. Knight C3, bishop B4, knight D5, hitting the bishop, all common theories so far. Bishop E7, knight F3, D6, G3, C6, knight takes E7. So here we're starting to go out of known theory, but these have all been pretty natural moves, and really not a lot has happened that's crazy at this point. The main thing to note here is Ding Liren got a position where he has the bishop pair against Gukesh D's bishop and knight. So a bishop pair can lead to an advantage, but with each side having 8 pawns, the position has the potential to be very locked up still, which can favor a knight over a bishop. So all things considered, this is still pretty close to an equal position. Bishop G2, F6. This might look strange. Ben Feingold says never play F6. It looks like it's opening up this king position on the light squares, but the idea is Gukesh wants to build a big center. He wants to play bishop E6, pawn to D5, and just have this massive center. So he's delaying his castling a little bit to grab that extra space. Castle, bishop E6, B3, D5. There's the big center. And now we see bishop to A3 by Ding Liren, putting his bishop on this diagonal. We saw him do this in the game where he played the knight F3 and B3 kind of Hikaru system, where he put his bishop on A3 very early on. I think Ding likes these positions where he has the bishop pair, and in the middle, the pawns are not locked up, right? So look at the white pawns. They are not locked up with the black pawns at the moment. So now we see, rook to C1 by Ding Liren. Each player is trying to improve their pieces. On to A5. The idea here is Gukesh grabs space, and then he wants to play knight to A6 next. And this B pawn could support, the A pawn could support the B4 square for knight to B4 in the future. Knight E1. This is a good strategy. One thing you want to do with the bishop pair is try to use your pawns from the flanks. Attack with the pawns on the sides of the board. And here we already have the C pawn attack in the center. And Ding wants to put the F pawn up and attack the center that way, while leaving his D and E pawns back a little bit. Rook E8, there's pawn F4. And now Gukesh does an interesting sequence of moves here. He takes on F4, then he takes on C4. Now, what's happened is Gukesh lost his 2 center pawns. Ding still has his 2 center pawns. Sorry, I keep hitting the space bar and then it moves the pieces around. Ding has his 2 center pawns, but the pawns for Ding Liren feel a little bit loose, right? There's something about these pawns in the middle that just seems like they're not well defended in this position. Okay, so rook E4 played. And one thing that I tell a lot of students is you need to be careful with a rook like this out in the middle of the board. The rook can quickly be attacked by pawns and minor pieces. Knight to A6. Knight could head into B4. Knight to C2, guarding the square. Queen C7. And now we see knight to D4. Double attack on the bishop. So Ding is looking to play very active here. I think he's playing for the win, which is nice to see. Bishop to F7. And now we do have to be careful from the white point of view because rook takes E4 is threatened, and after the bishop takes back, Queen E5 would fork these 2 pieces. So that's the sort of loose nature of Ding's position that I was talking about earlier. On to D3, securing that square on E4. Knight E5, knight F3, and now we see knight to D7 by Gukesh. A small mistake. Bishop to G6 was the stronger try. And after rook F4, knight to B4, bishop takes B4, A takes B4, Gukesh here has an advantage, and he can start to kind of press for that winning advantage. In the game, though, he played a move that's a bit passive. He brought the knight back to D7, and now really there's no advantage at all for black. This is closer to equal. Rook takes E8 by Ding. Rook takes back. And now we see rook to B1. So Ding puts his rook on the semi-open file, pressuring this pawn. Gukesh D has his rook on this semi-open file, pressuring the E pawn. But there was an improvement for Ding Liren. He could have played bishop to B2. And the reason this is good is because the C pawn is ready to capture on B5. So after, let's say, B5, C takes B5, and this pawn is pinned. So there's no quick B5 by Gukesh. And I think this is something that maybe was missed in the game. Oh, so for example, let's say black wants to move the queen out of the way, try to force b5. You could play queen d2, pressuring this pawn, and there's just no easy way for Gukesh d to get that break in. In the game, though, after rook to b1, Gukesh finds the super strong move, pawn to b5 immediately. This is a great decision. And here, 22 minutes, or sorry, 24 minutes for Ding, 50 minutes for Gukesh, and they're only on move 22. We have 18 moves left until move 40 when they get that bonus half hour. That's a little time pressure for Ding. 24 minutes to make 18 moves. That's not a lot of time per move. So now we see c takes b, queen b6, inserting the check before recapturing here. King f1, takes back, and now we see a blunder by Ding. He plays bishop to b2. Gukesh is actually in winning territory right now. The best move was bishop to h3 and trading off the bishop pair. So for example, if this knight goes to c5, we have bishop takes c5, knight takes c5, queen c2. It's still an advantage for Gukesh, but I'm surprised Ding didn't go for this. It keeps the material equal, and it keeps it pretty close to draw territory. Instead, he plays this riskier move, bishop to b2, because now there's bishop takes a2, snagging a free pawn, and Ding goes bishop to d4. So it's possible here that Ding still had the fighting spirit in him, and he's thinking, I'm going to play for the win, because he's playing dynamic chess here. And when Ding wants a fight, and we know Gukesh seems to always want to fight, that's when we get exciting games. Okay, so now on the very next move, we see a mistake by Gukesh. And this one is super complicated. Knight a to c5 was played, but knight d to c5 is the stronger move. And let me show you why. Knight d to c5, rook c1 would highlight this pinned knight, right? Put a second attacker on the knight. Bishop back to d5, queen c2, putting a third attacker on the knight. Rook c8, and if bishop to h3, there's rook c7. Now picture this same position with the other knight here. The problem in that position would be bishop could take this knight, the one that's sitting on d7, and there's no way for black to capture back without losing material. So that's the difference, and that's a crazy difference, but these guys are strong enough that they can find that, of course. But knight a to c5 was played. Rook c1, good move. Bishop to b3, poking at the queen. And I can just show you that line. If bishop to d5 was played, queen c2, rook c8, bishop h3, takes the knight. That's the winning line for white. So Gukesh did not have that resource here. Bishop to b3, queen e1. And this is better than queen d2. I was kind of confused at first. Queen d2 feels more natural to me because this sort of puts the queen on the line of the rook. Maybe there's knight takes d3 in some lines, depending on what's happening with this queen. But the idea is queen e1 allows the queen to come to f2, getting on this diagonal behind the pinned knight. So that's a strong move. Now Gukesh spends 7 minutes on this next move. He plays bishop to e6, and this is a blunder. We are back in winning territory. This game is crazy so far. So 7-minute think with a blunder. The way to hold the balance, and this line is crazy too. Pawn to a4. So let's say queen to f2 here. This is too slow due to pawn to a3. And it looks like black is just losing a piece. Let's look at it. Bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes, pawn to a2. Rook back, queen trade, and then the b pawn can start running. White has to eventually sack for a piece for the pawn. And this sort of position is very close to winning, if not already winning for Gukesh. The problem is that a pawn is never going anywhere. And this rook is tying the king down in this direction when the king wants to go that direction. This is probably a loss for white. So pawn to a4 right here was the way to hold the balance because there wasn't that quick queen f2 line. But in the game, bishop e6 was played, and now there's queen f2. That's the winning move, threatening bishop takes c5, and we have a decisive advantage right now. Rook to c8, bishop to e3. This threatens pawn to d4, highlighting the pin on the knight. Rook to c7, knight d4, hitting the bishop. Bishop drops back. 12 minutes each to make the next 9 moves. Now we see a super strong move by Ding Liren, knight to c6, This threatens rook takes c5. If the knight takes back, bishop takes c5, still holding the bishop pair and having 2 pieces for the rook. So Gukesh finds the best move. He has to sacrifice. Rook takes c6, and when the dust settles, it's going to be the exchange for a pawn. Bishop takes, queen takes, bishop takes, h6, and you can count the pawns here. We have 1 extra pawn for Gukesh, who's playing black, and Ding has a rook for the knight. So 1 point of material advantage for white, and this is an advantage for white according to the computer too. So I think what Gukesh has to play for is, can he make these passed pawns dangerous? Make Ding Liren really think about that. Also, maybe he can highlight the lack of king safety for Ding. You know, that king is just not quite as safe as it could be. With this knight potentially jumping around, queen may be coming in. He's got to make things complicated. King e1, bringing the king over to help against these pawns. And d2 is a pretty safe square for the king. Pawn to b4, queen to d4. And interestingly here, this has been a theme of the whole match. Ding wants to play queen d6 and offer the queen trade. It just seems like every game, Ding wants queen trades and Gukesh wants to avoid them. Knight e5, king d2, queen to g2, threatening knight f3 check as the pawn is pinned. That forks king and queen. Queen back to f2. Of course, another queen trade offer. Queen d5. And this is move 38. So queen d4, queen g2, that's move 39. Queen f2, queen d5, that's move 40. So now each player gets the bonus 30 minutes. This position is very close to winning for white still. And Ding Liren plays queen to d4, offering to repeat for the 3rd time if Gukesh just puts his queen back on g2. If Gukesh puts his queen on g2, that's a draw. So why in the world is Ding Liren taking a position where he has the chance to win? He has a very big advantage here. He has the extra time on the clock. He now has 37 minutes on the clock, and he offers the draw. Ding Liren offers the draw when he has a chance to win. I don't understand this at all. Now, maybe he felt this was too risky. Maybe he felt he couldn't calculate it, or he's afraid of Gukesh's calculation. But bishop to d4, this is the way to play for a win. Let me show you why. If pawn to a4 is played, you can take the knight. Queen takes back, and now do the thing you love to do, offer the queen trade, Ding. Pawn a3, trade queens. And now you get this position where the pawns are going to be stuck with the bishop tied down to the defense of the pawns. And this is going to be a problem because white can create a pass pawn on the d file soon. This rook has a ton of flexibility to attack kingside pawns. It can be ready to sacrifice on one of the queenside pawns. It can help the center pawns. This position, if not losing, is very close to a loss already. And I think it is a loss for black with best play. Just for an example, show a few moves what could happen. Something like this, and now all of a sudden it's hard to defend this pawn for black. So missed opportunity here by Ding. I mean, huge missed opportunity, I think, to play for the win. Instead, queen d4, and then Gukesh says, hey, if you don't want the draw, or if you want the draw, excuse me, if you don't want to play for the win, I'll play for the win. Gukesh plays queen to a2 check. He knows Ding is afraid of this position, and he decides to use that to his advantage. Rook c2, queen e6, queen d8 check, king h7. Now queen takes a5 by Ding, picking up a pawn. This is kind of the simplest way to play it. He's saying, essentially, he's afraid of the passed pawns, and he's willing to trade down. Pawn to b3, rook c1, queen d5, queen b4, queen g2, queen e4 check with a fork of king and queen, and Ding found this forced sequence that just leads straight to a draw in bishop and pawn endgame. Take, take, b2. So b2 has to be played, otherwise Gukesh is going to be in trouble down the exchange. Rook here, bishop a2, takes, check, takes, and here they agreed to a draw. King's going to take the knight. The bishop's going to drop back somewhere. Opposite colored bishops, the one extra pawn doesn't help at all. This is a dead draw. Gukesh knows it, Ding Liren knows it, so they shook hands. So that's game number 8, a crazy game, a huge missed opportunity for Ding. I give Gukesh a lot of credit for still just playing exciting chess and pushing the action. And early on in the game, Ding was playing for a win for most of that game. But then it got close to time control. He just seemed to get too nervous and move 41 hit. And for whatever reason, he decided not to play for the win. So we've seen this dynamic in almost the whole match so far, where essentially Ding plays solid, Gukesh pushes, sometimes over pushes his positions. But it'll be interesting to see what happens next. So we'll have the recap of game number 9 tomorrow, and then we have a rest day after that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next recap.